I was left in an orphanage with nothing but a photo of my parents, and no one ever came back for me. But I refused to give up, and now I've built a life they never expected. I arrived at Cedar Grove Children's Home on a drizzly October afternoon, clutching a worn leather satchel that still smelled faintly of my mother's perfume. At 7 years old, I had already learned that promises could dissolve in the chill of early morning. The tall iron gates creaked as they closed behind me, and I felt the sharp sting of abandonment settle in my chest. A caretaker led me down a corridor painted in pastel blues and yellows, colors meant to comfort, but only serving to highlight how out of place I felt. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor as I passed rows of small doors, each concealing another child's untold story. I was shown to room 12, where a single bunk bed stood beneath a bare window. I placed my satchel on the thin mattress, revealing 2 photographs, one of my parents standing together, smiling as if everything were fine, and the other of me at my 5th birthday party, surrounded by balloons and laughter. I traced the edges of those images, remembering warmth and safety that now felt worlds away. Across the hall, children's voices drifted through the open door of the playroom, a cacophony of joy that contrasted sharply with the hollow ache in my gut. That first night, I lay awake listening to the wind rattling the window pane, trying to inhale courage like a life-saving breath. I whispered promises to the darkness. I would grow strong. I would find purpose in this place. I would survive. In the silent hours before dawn, I understood that home was no longer a place. It was a story I had yet to write. And so, I began to tell myself the first lines of my new narrative, one etched in resilience rather than lament. Days at Cedar Grove settled into a rhythm that felt both predictable and suffocating. Mornings began with the metallic clang of the breakfast tray sliding beneath my door, the steam from porridge swirling like ghosts I couldn't chase away. I ate in silence, watching the other children exchange hushed observations about staff changes or borrowed toys. It was there, among whispered alliances and guarded glances, that I discovered the unspoken etiquette of survival. Never show too much curiosity, never ask too many questions, and always remember who held the power. School hours were the only reprieve. In a cramped classroom with its peeling walls, I found solace in numbers and letters. Chalk dust lingered in the air as I lost myself in long division and poetry analysis. My favorite became Emily Dickinson's lines, "Hope is the thing with feathers," an image of lightness that tethered me to something beyond these walls. For those moments, the ledger of my life balanced out. I could be a student, not an orphan. The teacher's nod of approval was a brief but potent warmth, reminding me that I still mattered. Afternoons stretched into solitary discoveries. I wandered the overgrown courtyard, noting the riot of wildflowers thrusting through cracked pavement. Each bloom seemed to define neglect, much like I tried to define neglect in my own heart. I cataloged them in my mind, dandelions bright as embers, forget-me-nots the color of sorrow transformed into promise. I imagined that I, too, could survive on sheer will, rooted in places that looked barren at first glance. At night, I pressed my ear to the wall, listening to muffled sobs or muted laughter, and reminded myself of the single rule I'd never break. I would not become just another forgotten face. In the hush before sleep, I laid plans for my future self, a testimony of resilience stitched together one small triumph at a time. By the time I turned 12, the walls of Cedar Grove felt almost familiar, worn edges softened by years of routine. I'd learned to navigate the subtleties of its hierarchy, the older kids who claimed the best beds, the quieter ones who formed secret reading circles, the few who never stopped dreaming of families that might call. I drifted between groups like a shadow, careful not to reveal how deeply I craved belonging. Academics became my refuge. I volunteered to help younger children with their homework. Teaching fractions to wide-eyed 8-year-olds lent me a strange authority. In their grateful smiles, I found purpose. My own grade soared, earning me a scholarship to the local middle school. Walking into that bustling hall for the first time, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. An orphan among children whose families packed their lunches and waited in the carpool line. I carried my books in the same leather satchel, but now it seemed heavier, stuffed with possibilities rather than memories. Weekends at Cedar Grove were the hardest. While I peeked out the window, I saw pairs of siblings reunited, parents waving goodbye after a day of supervised visitation. I learned to flatten my back against the cold glass, stifling the ache in my chest. Yet in those moments, I also discovered resilience. I started volunteering at the small kitchen garden on Saturdays, kneeling in the soil as if rooting myself in something real. I pruned bean vines and harvested carrots, feeling the earth yield beneath my fingers, proof that effort could bring nourishment. That spring, the director handed me a certificate for outstanding contribution to community life. As applause echoed in the common room, I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the boy who arrived with a teddy bear and a broken promise. I was someone who could transform neglect into growth, despair into determination. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe in a future beyond those iron gates. As I entered my mid-teens, Cedar Grove became both sanctuary and cage. Each morning, I donned the same worn jacket, its threadbare elbows a testament to years of repeated washing. I polished my shoes until they gleamed like faint hopes, determined to present my best self at the community college where I enrolled part-time. The 16-year-olds with inked notebooks and confident strides seemed both foreign and fascinating. I watched them negotiate friendships and futures, silent and observant, carving out my own niche at the library desk among stacks of textbooks. Weekdays blurred into a cycle of lectures, study sessions, and long walks home under street lamps that flickered like fragile promises. I juggled algebra proofs with late shifts in the dining hall, loading trays of overcooked vegetables for children younger than I once was. There, amid the clatter of dishes and hum of fluorescent lights, I honed a rare skill, the ability to transform exhaustion into resolve. When fatigue settled in my bones, I reminded myself of Emily Dickinson's Feathered Hope, imagining that small spark could carry me through another day. Outside, the world pulsed with possibility I scarcely allowed myself to feel. I saved every extra penny, stuffing crumpled bills into the lining of my coat until the pockets bulged. In those quiet moments, I sketched plans for life beyond Cedar Grove, a tiny apartment near campus, a part-time job at the bookstore, phone calls home that didn't end in silence. I practiced polite confidence in front of the cracked mirror, rehearsing introductions and resumes as though they were lifelines. Yet despite every precaution, loneliness crept in like a chill draft. I learned to fill it with purpose, mentoring a new arrival, volunteering at weekend workshops, cataloging my achievements in a battered journal. With each entry, I reclaimed fragments of identity that had felt lost, stitching them into a tapestry of ambition and self-respect. And though the iron gates still stood behind me, my thoughts were already charting paths far beyond their reach. At 18, the world beyond Cedar Grove's gates unfolded with trepidation and excitement in equal measure. I moved into a tiny rented room above Mrs. Patel's grocery store, where the scent of fresh chapati mingled with morning light. Every dawn began with a ritual of unlocking my front door and emerging into a street pulsing with everyday life. Commuters rushing past, shopkeepers arranging produce, birds darting through telephone wires. I carried a worn satchel and a notebook filled with plans for college applications, part-time work, and a life that felt both terrifyingly vast and impossibly attainable. Days were a blur of lectures at the community college and evening shifts stocking shelves at Patel's. My muscles ached from lifting boxes, but each tired step reminded me that I was building something real, paying rent, buying groceries, and even treating myself to a used textbook when I'd saved enough. I learned the delicate art of balance, allocating hours to study, work, and the occasional stolen hour of rest. In the quiet of my room, I lined up future possibilities like dominoes, associate's degree, bachelor's, then a career that might finally let me leave my past behind. Yet the absence of family cast a long shadow. On Sunday mornings, I'd sit at a small cafe table, sipping black coffee and watching parents walk by with children on their laps. A pang of yearning would twist in my chest, a reminder that I'd never experienced ordinary Sunday mornings with my own blood. I scribbled poems about empty chairs and half-heard lullabies, hoping words could bridge the distance between then and now. Despite the ache, I refused to surrender to sorrow. Instead, I poured it into ambition, applying for every scholarship I could find, gathering recommendation letters from professors who saw something in me beyond my worn jacket and quiet resolve. In each stamped envelope and typed application, I embedded a piece of my future, forging an identity defined not by abandonment, but by relentless hope. By the time I reached my second year at community college, the rhythm of independence felt ingrained in my bones. Each morning, I cycled past row houses painted in cheerful pastels, their gardens blooming with marigolds and dahlias, as if life itself refused to acknowledge my past. My coursework had grown challenging, calculus proofs demanding patience, literature essays demanding vulnerability, but I met each assignment with the same quiet determination that had carried me through Cedar Grove. I maintained 2 part-time jobs, shelving books at the campus library and delivering papers before dawn. The latter meant waking at 4:30 a.m., the city still hushed except for the distant hum of garbage trucks. The cold air pricked my lungs, but I told myself it was training for greater hardships. By 7 a.m., I returned home with crumpled bills in my coat pockets and the satisfaction of a task completed. In those solitary hours, I drafted cover letters and scholarship essays, each sentence forging a path farther from a past defined by abandonment. On weekends, I volunteered as a tutor for at-risk youth. Guiding a 12-year-old through algebraic equations reminded me of the boy who once sat alone in a faded classroom, clutching his teddy bear. Their gratitude, bright eyes lighting up after grasping a concept, felt like small victories stitched into my own narrative. I realized that mentoring others was more than charity. It was a reclamation of purpose, a way to transform my orphan childhood into a catalyst for empathy and service. Financial pressures never fully lifted. I juggled loan applications, scholarship interviews, and emergency repairs when my bicycle's chain snapped en route to class. Yet every obstacle reinforced a simple truth. Resilience is born in the crucible of necessity. As I stepped into the library each morning, oversized textbooks under my arm, I carried not only my satchel, but also the promise of a future I was determined to claim, one chapter at a time. The acceptance letter from State University arrived on a gray November morning, its inked seal promising a world I had only glimpsed in scholarship brochures. My breath caught as I slit the envelope, revealing not only admission, but a modest grant that would ease the burden of tuition. The weeks that followed were a flurry of orientation sessions, dorm tours, and textbook orders. I traded my familiar commuter bike for a campus ID and a trembling sense of possibility I'd never dared to acknowledge aloud. Moving into Maple Hall, I unpacked familiar treasures. The 2 photographs from childhood, my battered satchel, and a small potted fern I'd nurtured since high school. Across the corridor, I met fellow freshmen whose family stories overflowed with summer vacations and holiday dinners. I hesitated before sharing my own. A boy dropped off at Cedar Grove, who found refuge in textbooks and wildflowers. Yet, when I spoke, their eyes reflected admiration, not pity, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my past transform into something I could own. Academics soared to new heights. I wrestled with advanced physics in Professor Harris's lecture hall and debated ethics in Dr. Ramirez's seminar. Each late-night study session in the glowing library stacks rang with the promise that knowledge could reshape destiny. My part-time job shifted to tutoring freshmen in calculus, and I watched them lean in as I sketched integrals on napkins, proof that my journey could light a path for others. In winter's hush, I visited the campus greenhouse, marveling at orchids blooming in defiance of frost. I pressed my palm against humid glass, feeling kinship with their stubborn persistence. In that moment, I understood that home wasn't defined by walls or blood. It was forged by the places and people that believed in me. And with each semester that passed, I took another step toward a future built on resilience rather than regret. Junior year at State University brought both exhilaration and disquiet. I balanced a full course load, organic chemistry lectures, political theory seminars, and late-night library research, with my steady role as a supplemental instructor for undergraduates. My mornings began before sunrise. I brewed strong coffee in my dorm kitchenette, then cycled through quiet campus quads, inhaling the crisp air as the world slowly stirred to life. Textbooks weighed heavily in my backpack, but so did a growing confidence that I was more than the sum of my past hardships. One afternoon, an unmarked envelope arrived at my dorm mailbox. The return address was my childhood home, a place I hadn't visited in over a decade. My heart pounded as I slid it open, a letter from my parents requesting financial assistance. They claimed difficult times, medical bills, car repairs, unexpected debts, and asked if I could help out, now that I was earning scholarships and part-time income. A surge of conflicting emotions washed over me, residual ache from their abandonment, mingled with a hesitant spark of duty. I reread the letter, noting how casually they referred to our family struggles, as if I had never existed outside those iron gates. That night, I lay in my dorm bed staring at the ceiling panels. The orphanage rules I'd internalized whispered that I should shield myself, keep my achievements private. Yet a quiet part of me wondered if this was the moment to redefine family, to set new boundaries rather than sever ties abruptly. I pulled out my journal and sketched a timeline. First deposit for my tutoring job, recurring scholarship stipends, living expenses. I highlighted the precise amount I could consider without jeopardizing my own stability. In a pool of lamplight, I wrote a brief note back, explaining my own commitments and offering what I could. No more, no less. Closing the journal, I felt the weight shift. I was no longer the helpless boy at Cedar Grove, but a self-possessed individual charting his own course. The spring of my senior year dawned with a sunlight I barely recognized, a light that no longer cast long shadows of doubt across my path. Commencement rehearsals filled the quad with a hum of anticipation. Caps and gowns draped across folding chairs like silent sentinels awaiting transformation. I traced the embossed letters on my diploma cover during a quiet moment in the student lounge, recalling the night I first whispered promises to the darkness in Cedar Grove. That boy, clutching a teddy bear beneath a flickering bulb, would scarcely recognize the man I'd become. Graduation day arrived soft and clear. I stepped onto the stage to the measured rhythm of my name being called, heart pounding as I accepted the diploma from Dean Caldwell. The applause that rippled through the crowd felt both surreal and deeply earned. I searched among the faces for any hint of family, but found only friends, professors, and strangers moved by my story. As I looked out over the sea of caps, I sensed that home was no longer tied to an address or bloodline, but woven through every supportive nod and shared smile. Later, I packed the last of my belongings into a battered duffel bag, placing the 2 childhood photographs atop neatly folded shirts. My satchel, the vessel of memories and ambitions, rested by the door, ready for its next journey. Before leaving Maple Hall, I paused in the empty hallway, running my hand along the painted walls that had witnessed years of laughter, tears, and quiet determination. I whispered a farewell to the place that had shaped me, knowing that the narrative I'd begun in abandonment had reached its first full chapter. Stepping into the warm afternoon, I carried with me the echoes of every lesson learned, resilience born from loss, purpose forged in solitude, and hope cradled in tiny victories. The gates closed gently behind me, but this time they did not confine. They simply marked the threshold of everything yet to come. Update 1. Just 2 weeks after graduation, my phone buzzed with a video call from a number I recognized but hadn't dialed in years, my mother's. Her face filled the small screen, lined with fatigue and framed by graying hair. Behind her stood my father, gaze flickering between hope and shame. They spoke quickly, barely pausing for breaths, about unexpected medical bills and a looming mortgage deadline. Their voices trembled as they asked if I could help cover a portion, emphasizing how close they'd come to losing everything again. I closed my eyes, recalling the hollow echo of that first morning at Cedar Grove, the metallic slam of a door that severed me from their world. Guilt coiled in my chest alongside the anger I'd bottled for years. Yet, hearing the raw desperation in my mother's voice, I recognized echoes of my own pleas as a child, hidden beneath layers of stoicism. I cleared my throat, measuring each word. I congratulated them on my graduation, acknowledged their struggles, and gently reminded them of my own commitments: graduate school tuition, rent, living expenses. Their shoulders slumped. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I offered what I could, a modest sum drawn from my savings, enough to cover 1 month's mortgage payment, but far short of their total need. "I wish I could do more," I said softly, "but I'm building my own life now." They thanked me, voices thick, and the call ended. In the silence that followed, I felt the familiar churn of abandonment, but this time it mingled with a cautious pride. I had set a boundary, offering compassion without self-erasure. And in that balance, I discovered a new facet of family, one shaped by mutual respect, not obligation. In the days that followed our call, I noticed the shift in myself more than in them. I woke earlier, not to deliver papers or attend classes, but to sit at my desk and sift through graduate program applications. Each essay draft bore traces of that conversation, gratitude tempered with hard-won independence. I wove into my personal statement the moment I learned to extend compassion without sacrificing my own foundation. My mother's return messages were careful and subdued, tinged with relief but also a new deference. She asked about my research plans, about my courses, as if discovering me for the first time. I realized how long I'd waited for genuine interest in my life beyond the boy you left behind. Their calls became less about requests and more about updates: a shared recipe, a photo of the repaired car, an inquiry into my new routine. In those small gestures, I found the beginnings of reciprocity. One evening, I visited the campus counseling center, not out of crisis, but to better understand why that old ache persisted. In the softly lit office, I spoke of abandonment, of the tightrope walk between generosity and self-preservation. Naming those feelings felt strangely liberating. I left with strategies for honoring my own needs while remaining open to empathy. That weekend, I drafted a letter to Cedar Grove's director, thanking him for the lessons that shaped me and offering to fund a small scholarship in my name. As I signed my full name at the bottom, I felt the final threads of my old identity untangle. The child from the orphanage narrative still lived in memory, but now it existed alongside a more complex truth. I was capable of kindness on my own terms, grounded in strength rather than obligation. A month later, I received an unexpected package from Cedar Grove. Inside was a framed photograph of the scholarship presentation ceremony, a circle of bright-eyed children holding hand-drawn thank you cards, their faces alight with hope. Beneath the photo, a handwritten note from Mrs. Thompson, the new director, described how the scholarship had paid for library books, art supplies, and piano lessons, luxuries few of them could have imagined before. As I held the frame, I felt a swell of emotion I hadn't anticipated. Pride, yes, but also a tender ache, as if the boy I once was had finally been seen. That evening, I taped the photo above my desk, letting its glow illuminate late-night study sessions. Each time I glanced at it, I was reminded that my past, once a source of pain, could now be a wellspring of possibility for others. I drafted a follow-up letter to Cedar Grove, outlining my plan to visit over winter break and host a small workshop on goal setting and self-advocacy. I imagined sitting with those children, sharing strategies that had guided me. Break big goals into manageable steps, celebrate small victories, and allow yourself room to grow from setbacks. The scholarship and my upcoming visit transformed my relationship with Cedar Grove from mere memory to active engagement. No longer was it simply the place that had shaped my childhood. It had become a partner in my journey, a living testament to how compassion and boundaries can coexist in that delicate balance. I found a deeper sense of belonging, a realization that family can be chosen, nurtured, and redefined through shared purpose. Update 2. That winter break, I stepped off the bus at Cedar Grove with a duffel bag full of notebooks, pens, and printed goal-setting worksheets. The orphanage looked smaller under the pale December sun, its brick facade softened by a dusting of snow. Inside, I was greeted by Mrs. Thompson's warm smile and the eager faces of 20 children clustered in the common room. Their eyes widened as I unpacked color markers and sticky notes, recalling the boy whose trembling hands first traced those very worksheets in my cramped dorm room. I began the workshop by telling them my story briefly, how I'd arrived at 7 clutching a ragged satchel, feeling lost and voiceless. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fireplace. Then, handing out worksheets divided into dreams, obstacles, and action steps, I guided them through setting one small, achievable goal. A girl in a bright red scarf wrote, "Learn to ride a bike." A boy with oversized glasses jotted, "Read 1 book each month." Their determination stirred something fierce in me, a reminder that resilience wasn't mine alone, but a gift I could share. As we moved into action steps, I encouraged them to break big dreams into bite-sized tasks, practice pedaling for 5 minutes daily, or read 10 pages each evening before bed. I watched their sticky notes blossom into colorful mosaics of ambition. When one shy boy asked, "What if I fail?" I recalled my own nights of doubt and replied, "Failure is just feedback. Every time you try, you learn something new, even if it's that you need a different approach." By the end, the children clustered around me, pressing their worksheets into my hands with bright smiles. In that moment, Cedar Grove felt less like a place of endings and more like a launching pad, each goal a rocket fueled by hope and guided by small, steady steps. And I knew that sharing my journey didn't weaken my story. It amplified its power to transform others' lives. After the workshop, I lingered in the common room, observing the children cluster around the new books and worksheets I donated. Their laughter echoed against the high ceilings, a melody that felt both fragile and triumphant. I helped Mrs. Thompson arrange the donated art supplies on low shelves and marveled at how quickly the space had transformed, from sterile dormitory to creative hub brimming with ambition. That evening, I sat by the window of my childhood room, brushing snow off the sill as memories drifted in. I recalled sledding down the courtyard hill for the first time, terrified but exhilarated, and how that small triumph had kindled a spark of confidence within me. Now, I realized I was offering that same spark to these children, lighting beacons of possibility where once there had been only shadows. The next morning, I led a small group on a tour of the garden where I had once learned to plant carrots. I showed them how to loosen soil and select saplings for transplanting, explaining that patience and care yield growth, both in plants and in people. As a boy my age once watched me struggle to coax a sprout to life, today I knelt beside them, guiding tiny hands to press seeds gently into the earth. Each seed represented a goal, each sprout a testament to collective perseverance. In the late afternoon light, I gathered my things to leave. The children pressed handmade drawings into my hands, sketches of blooming flowers, bicycles with training wheels, and open books with pages fluttering like wings. Their eyes shone with gratitude, but also something deeper, belief. Walking back to the bus stop, I carried their artwork like medals of honor, feeling the full circle of my journey, from abandoned child to mentor, from recipient of compassion to its steward. And in that transformation, I recognized the true legacy of my story, one not defined by endings, but by the endless possibilities we plant in each other's lives. Back at State University, the impact of that winter visit resonated in everything I did. Each lecture hall and library aisle now felt infused with purpose. I wasn't just studying for degrees, I was gathering tools for transformation. In my backpack alongside textbooks, I carried the children's drawings, tiny testimonies to resilience pressed between pages like precious talismans. When stress mounted during exam season, I would pause, run my fingers over a sketch of a sunflower towering over a cracked doorstep, and remember that hope blooms in unlikely places. I also found myself cultivating a campus initiative, a goal garden outside the student center, where anyone, freshman or graduate, could plant a seed, both literally and figuratively. We installed small raised beds, donated by the university's horticulture club, and invited students to write their aspirations on biodegradable tags before tucking them beside seedlings. Over spring break, dozens of hands turned soil together, murmuring ambitions into the earth. Watching a community unite around growth reminded me of that first carrot harvest at Cedar Grove and proved how connection can elevate solitary dreams. Meanwhile, letters from Cedar Grove arrived regularly. Updates on the goal-setting club I'd helped launch, photos of shy new members blossoming into confident participants, and occasional drawings, bicycles, books, and now tiny potted ferns. Their successes felt like mirror reflections of my own journey. I realized that the boundary I set with my parents last year, offering what I could without sacrificing myself, had established a model I now applied more broadly, compassion balanced with self-respect. As the semester drew to a close, I prepared to return once more to Cedar Grove, this time with fellow volunteers from campus. We would host workshops on financial literacy and creative writing, blending expertise with empathy. Standing at the threshold of another winter break, I understood that my story was no longer confined to beginnings or endings. It was a living narrative, sustained by shared purpose and the knowledge that every seed we plant, whether of soil or of support, holds the promise of new life.